We're live. Welcome everyone to a new episode where we are going to discuss some endurance training, some zone training, what we think works, what the populace thinks works, and going to go over and kind of dissect zone training and why it might be so popular right now. As kind of 2 years ago, as Matt Fraser wrapped up his career, he kind of, led to his secret weapon being his zone 2 training. Inshaw's coach, he's in the aerobic capacity realm, and that's what he calls his, style of training. A few other athletes had kind of slowly started talking about that zone 2 and zone training in general is what made them really good. And that kind of, propelled this training ideology to, the pedestal of the sport where everyone believed they needed to do zone training. That's what they weren't doing. So that must be what's going to make them better. And maybe it did work for some people. Maybe people some improvements, a shift in their training, but kind of since then, and then other people started putting in their 2 cents. Other coaches have said, we use this style of training too, or we have, and it just slowly gained notoriety. So we wanted to, kind of chat about what we think is relevant in training endurance. Talk about zone 2, if you could benefit from it, how it could or could not benefit CrossFit, and if it could be potentially making you worse as well. So that's kind of the intro to everything. Do you got anything to add?
Yeah, well, it's telling that Matt Fraser was the type of person that would say that it was very important or helpful for his development or performance. And we'll get into that because it wasn't the 45-year-old quarterfinal athlete who said that zone 2 work was what made the difference for their performance. It was the best in the world. And that's for a reason, which again, we'll get into. So we'll leave that there for now because we'll get into it. But yeah, I think, as before we dive into it, I know we're both not going to pretend to be experts on this topic. There's a litany of research in academia, in the endurance world that covers this topic at length. So we're going to give a cursory overview of this and then how it applies to the CrossFit athlete. And so if you want to dive deeper into this, then I would suggest you look into the research, you look at triathlon training, endurance training, because they're the experts in this type of tool and how to really use it. And Peter Attia, of course, has been very outspoken about it, zone 2 training. And he has a lot of great insights, research, protocols, and also in his book, Outlive, which I read recently, he goes into some detail around it. So there's a lot of information and knowledge that can be absorbed. And so today, hopefully we can take some of that knowledge and apply it to the subgroup that we are speaking to on this show, to give people a little bit more insight on whether or not it's a helpful addition to their training that they're doing.
Yeah. Side note, did you see Peter Attia's recent podcast with Derek from More Plates, More Dates?
I saw some clips, but I didn't see the whole. Yeah. I didn't see the whole thing.
Yeah, it's good. But yeah, the zone 2, real quick. Well, people, Fraser, the champ basically said, this is what I do. And immediately people were just like, I need to plug and play this. Like, it's just going to fit here. And like you said, you need to go research it and see it and understand what it is, because that'd be similar to saying like, I'm going to do West Side. People are familiar with that. I'm going to go do West Side. And what they did is just put banded bench press once a week and said that's their West Side kind of thing. So understanding it will probably help you see if you're actually doing zone training in general. Because again, zone 2 is just one specific area of zone training in general. So we're gonna get into that as well. But that's a big piece I saw is people just saying like, oh yeah, I'm doing zone 2 training. And what they meant was they're just riding the bike 30 minutes once a week. So yeah. So understanding what zone 2 training is, we can
Yes.
start there. So
Yeah.
mainly
Okay. So,
we need to break down zone training, not just zone 2 training.
yes. So zone training is based on a 5-zone model. That zone 5 would be your VO2 max, and then it's based upon your maximum heart rate. So the zone cutoff points are a percentage of your maximum. So that's a key thing to note from the beginning. To effectively do zone 2 training, you need a maximal heart rate to base the percentages off of. If you don't have a max heart rate, if you do the 220 minus your age, that's not really a good, it's an okay tool, but that's not a real legitimate tool. You need to find a maximum. So if you look at any endurance sport who leverages zone work, they're going to do it based off of a maximum that they got with the specific implement. That's the other key. That's what people forget too. So because your max heart rate swimming is not going to be remotely close to your maximum running or close to the same as cycling or rowing or kayaking or whatever the discipline is. So if you really want to be legitimate in your application of this, then you need to find a maximum that you then can create a zone profile that could put you in an actual zone 2. So that's what we're referencing when we talk about the zone model. Now, it only goes up to 5. There is actually zones above 5 because 5 correlates with a VO2 max, and you can work at levels of intensity that are above a VO2 max, which will lead to task failure before you reach a VO2 max. So in exercise physiology, that's classified as the extreme intensity domain. So to give you an example, that would be ride an assault bike all out for a minute. That would be classified as the extreme intensity domain because you will reach failure before your body can reach a VO2 max. So there are levels of effort and work that are outside of a 5-zone model. So don't think it's only the 5 zones. There's actually levels above or zones above 5.
Yeah. So
Now,
basically, you're riding the assault bike for a minute. You're at 100% effort. Your ventilation and your heart rate, your breathing and your heart rate aren't stopping you from going any further. Like your muscles are stopping you. You're not going to be able to keep doing that. So doesn't matter what zone you're in. I mean, you're not in either of these zones, but that's not stopping you from continuing the effort.
Yes. So now back to zone 2. What is zone 2? So zone 2 is also called your first lactate threshold, which is the separator between aerobic metabolism. So you have a steady state of lactate in the blood. And then right when you pass this zone 2 threshold, lactate threshold 1, you start to see this subtle increase in lactate accumulation in the blood. So you're not uptaking as much as you're spitting out. And so that's when you start dipping into your zone 3 or also your heavy intensity domain. So intensity domain framework, which you can kind of put on top of a 5-zone model. So that's something else you could look into. You have a moderate intensity domain, you have a heavy intensity domain, you have severe intensity domain, you have an extreme intensity domain. Moderate and heavy are physiologically sustainable work rates. Severe and extreme are unsustainable physiological work rates. So the separator between moderate and heavy, that line is considered your first lactate threshold. Your second lactate threshold is the separation between your heavy and your severe domain, which on this chart with this model, this would be probably going between 4 and 5. So that's when you'll see lactate accumulation in the blood start to rise really quickly. So the key with zone 2 work is you're trying to stay below the point where lactate is rising because now fuel is being consumed in a less efficient manner. And so what you're trying to do with this type of work is you're trying to teach the body how to metabolize fuel and oxygen really efficiently at low levels of intensity. This is why having a heart rate graph from a maximum is helpful. However, there is a really good tool that can act as a substitute if you don't have a maximum heart rate, and that's called the talk test. And so paper, I actually have a quote from the paper. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to quote it, and then I could plug it into the chat if people wanted to look at this paper. So the concept of the talk test goes back at least until 1937, when Professor John Grayson advised mountaineers in Scotland to, quote, climb no faster than you can talk. While clearly not designed for exercise prescription, and acknowledging that the concept of the ventilatory threshold, which is also known as lactate threshold, was still decades in the future. Grayson's advice recognized the fundamental truth that patterns of breathing and speech can give insight into the magnitude and sustainability of exercise intensity for a given task. End quote. So the talk test lines up really nicely with zone 2, where if you're riding the assault bike and somebody's next to you and you're having a conversation, if you're able to comfortably talk to them, there's a good chance you're in zone 2. If it's now becoming hard for you to have a conversation with them, or it's hard for you to count to 30 or 40 out loud, then you're probably past zone 2. Because when you talk, you are limiting the amount of oxygen you can uptake. So being able to have a conversation is ensuring that your exertion rate is staying at a acceptable level for these adaptations we want. So the talk test is a really good, simple gauge to ensure that whatever this work is that you're doing is getting the adaptations you want. And again, the paper, I can put it in the comments. So if people wanted to read it, because it's really interesting, insightful.
Yeah. And something you noted, something you did a minute ago was that zone 2 is going to differ per movement, because your heart rates are, different per movement. And so running, I'm going to have a different zone 2 than I am, row. Specifically for CrossFit, you're going to be running and rowing. And what that would mean is you can't just take, you have a watch or you have a strap or something, and your max heart rate on it through all your training is 202. And then you just try and take 60 to 70% of that and then use that for all your zone 2 training, because people are mistakenly doing that as well. So if you are actually zone training, then the specific modality that you're doing, and you're doing that specific heart rate training as well.
Yes, exactly. So that hopefully gives a very, very brief overview of zone 2, what it's based off of, what physiologically we're speaking of, and a very simple way of gauging it without having to go through the work of finding a maximum and creating a graph.
Yeah.
So next, talking about application and kind of insights from zone 2 work. So I think the biggest thing to be said on this is zone 2 adaptations are specific to the muscles that are being worked. One caveat though, if you are a novice or somebody who's very detrained, then the adaptations will be a lot more broad in general. If you're somewhat trained, it'll be much more specific to the actual muscle groups you're working. So for example, if you're riding the C2 bike or a road bike at a zone 2 pace, the adaptations in improved oxygen consumption and fuel efficiency are going to be specific to the quadriceps. They're not going to be specific to the arms, the shoulders, the traps, or the core, whatever other muscle group you want to think of. So adaptations are specific to the muscles that are being worked. Think of the SAID principle there. And there's a really good analogy that I learned that is a good way of thinking about zone 2 work and the adaptations you're going after, and how it's specific to the muscles that are being worked in the modality. So think of your arteries, your capillary beds as roads and highways. And the central city is your heart. So your heart's the big city, and then all these roads feed out into all these little villages, which happen to be all of your muscles. As you train, you turn those little dirt roads into paved roads, into highways, into freeways. That allows for more and more traffic. And the more and more traffic is oxygen and blood that gets delivered to the working tissue, so it can work at higher rates and clear waste more effectively and allow you to do more and more work.
Mm-hmm.
What you're doing with training is, of course, you're developing those roads, those highways more and more and more, so that you can work at higher and higher rates. Now, as you get more fit and more developed in your system, some of those roads are fully developed. Like, you can't add more roads. You've reached your maximum amount of available roads. So, for example, if you grew up playing soccer from age 4 to 21, or football for our European followers, the roads in your legs are probably really, really developed. There's probably no more roads you can add. So you don't need to spend time doing zone 2 work if you were doing it and needed to do it on a bike. If you were a CrossFitter, it would probably be more of ski erg or rowing or even echo bike to work and develop the roads in the upper body, because the roads in the upper body are not developed because you haven't been doing that for 20 years almost. Whereas if you were a rower, then you probably have lots of roads developed in your upper body and your lower body. So you're probably actually pretty good there. Now, once all the roads are developed, then you can put more emphasis on the economy and efficiency of the actual expression of the movement. So that's where somebody like the soccer player or a hockey player, where you don't need more roads. Now we can work on other attributes. But some people do need roads. And in the sport of CrossFit, most people need a lot of roads in their upper body because they don't have the contraction volume built in the upper body, like a gymnast would, or probably a water polo player would. So that's one way to think about, what are we actually trying to do with this type of training, or what are we actually trying to do with any type of training we're doing outside of specific CrossFit work, which is we're trying to develop the ability to get blood and oxygen to the working muscles really fast and efficiently.
Yeah. So then that kind of leads into some of the goal of the zone training or zone 2 training, and the possible benefits that could come from it, whether it's correct for CrossFit or not. That would be the end goal. Is I'm trying to run, I'm trying to increase my ability to run, and then, in turn, increase or improve my ability in workouts with running, because now I'm more efficient or have better roads to bring oxygen and bring blood.
Yes. And so on here, I wrote preferred modalities for zone 2 easy training for CrossFit in order of usefulness. So in my opinion, most useful would be the ski erg, because the ski erg is going to develop a lot of roads in the upper body. So in the tricep, the lat, the shoulder, the traps, the upper back. That's what we need, a lot of roads up there, because a lot of the volume in the sport is around the shoulder girdle. So ski erg would be the most effective for that. Then rowing, then echo bike or assault bike, then Versa climber, and then bike erg or stationary bike. Again, a stationary bike won't be that helpful unless somebody has really underdeveloped legs because they just haven't trained them, or they're a novice and they just haven't trained a lot in general, and they will get a general adaptation from just the exposure of it. So ski erg and rower would be really good tools for a CrossFitter to drive specific adaptations that they need in the tissues that are required of the sport.
Where would you put running?
So running's interesting because of the eccentric loading, and also because most people aren't good at running, which means they make it too challenging and they're not really doing zone 2 running. So I usually don't use running as zone 2, because it can be too fatiguing on other characteristics of the sport, which we'll get into when we talk about needs analysis for the sport. And most times people go too fast anyways. And if you wanted them to go slower, that's almost like they're walking, and then that's not as helpful. And also, running for most people isn't that sport specific, because you don't, unless you're a semifinal or a games athlete. Running. Now, we could go on a tangent here because I could make an argument on both sides of this, but given what we're talking about,
Yeah.
those people in the quarterfinals of the Open and, you know, that big population group, if they were to add this into their training, you would want to leverage the rower, the ski erg, and the bike way more than you would running, because it's going to have a lot more application to the actual sport, because you need to be good at rowing, because rowing's always tested in the first two stages of the competition, because it's easily scalable and
Measured.
what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, measured, and yeah, we'll leave it at that. So
Yeah.
running's a little sticky.
Because
And
the
if
other side
somebody
of the
is good,
argument is you think it's a basic tool that you should be improving.
yes, because the other side of the argument would be, if you're great at running, that will have a lot of transfer and carry over to all of your other fitness attributes. So being good at running is a really good use of time and a tool. However, we got to go back to a needs analysis of the sport, which we'll get into. And most often running ought to be down the line once some general fitness has been developed, and you also have time for it, because it takes time, which is something we're glancing over a little bit, but you do need a lot of time. We'll get into that a little bit more. What was I going to say? Yeah, I mean, that's good enough. But you did, before you brought that up,
Yeah,
there's kind of the desired effects that we're trying to get from this type of training. So this can help provide context on, like, what are we actually doing? I know I gave the roads analogy, which is a good analogy for how to think about what's going on, but what's actually trying to happen. So the first one is the primary muscles are being trained. So we're trying to train and develop those muscles and the efficiency of those muscles. We're trying to increase blood flow that is directed to the working muscles. That's developing the roads, the highways, the freeways to those muscles. And then 3, cellular adaptations. So mitochondrial and capillary density. Those are the actual adaptations at the muscle level that we're trying to improve through this type of training. And that's why the specific musculature that's being trained is what's going to be receiving these adaptations, which is increasing mitochondrial density, increasing capillary density, which is going to give you more horsepower in those working muscles, or just those muscles in general. So that's what we're trying to do when we're using this tool. And at face value, it can, of course, sound very exciting and valuable, but we can't forget you only have so much time.
Yeah.
And so you have to weigh what's a good use of my time given my goals and given where I'm at. So I think that's where people can lose a sense of direction when thinking about implementing this type of training into this type of tool into their training. So now we'll get into some like main points around CrossFit and how Zone 2 kind of fits into that. Any pieces from that or follow-ups?
Yeah. I was thinking more on what people trying it and seeing improvement, and people are immediately going to think, well, it's improving for me, so why would I stop doing it? Or, like, why is this not important? Or if I do have the time, because, it depends on what people are doing, but a lot of people were probably seeing improvement because they were removing something that was maybe costing them too much, or so someone removed some really intense work and put in some easier work. And that is probably the principle of what people are actually benefiting from, not necessarily just the Zone 2. Like, you're doing easier training overall than you're doing hard training. And that's how the things that you mentioned are attained. Like, you're not going to improve the blood flow or improve your roads by doing things that are super intense and super hard, unless you're very, very at the beginner stage of whatever you're doing. But so you're not we're not necessarily saying that these things are like bad things, because we're kind of saying that if you don't have time, there's probably something better you could be doing, that's what we're going to get into. But like, we're not saying it's not going to work, but we're leading you possibly shouldn't be doing, or why it should be only done if you have the time.
Well, and you also have to classify what does improvement mean? Like how are you, what are you determining, or how are you determining that you're actually getting better from adding this in? So that's important, because before you would implement it, we would want to come up with, okay, why do we need to add this in, and what benefit are we looking for? And then of course trying to monitor and watch that as you go through the training and the volume that you're building. So because you could just do it, and through a placebo effect, you could assume you're just getting better because you're doing it because you heard Matt Frazier does it. When in reality, maybe you're not even really getting better. You're just, you're using more time to exercise, but you might not be making up for that with also the recovery you need to add in. Because if you're doing more work, you're going to have to accommodate for that with recovery and all the pieces on the other side of the equation. So we can't lose sight of that as well, which is why I mentioned time. Because on the one side of the equation, you have, let's say, energy out, and depending upon how much you are expelling there, you're going to have to replenish with energy in some way, shape, or form. And so if you keep everything the same over here, but you add more over here, that's simple math. You're going to be in a deficit, and that's going to compound over time. That's going to be problematic in a few months. So that's why, got to think about these things. So
yeah, and I think people think aerobic capacity, like I'm improving aerobic capacity, and not, like you said, if you sit on a bike erg and your only it's targeting mainly the quads and the upper leg muscles, that they think I'm just improving, like it's improving that domain. I did it for 45 minutes. It's improving all of my endurance work by doing that, which in reality, there's very little carryover. And it's not just, I've been doing bike erg and row training where the row might have a little more carryover, but in general, if you're just doing that style of training, it's not just making your aerobic system a ton more robust in terms of what you need for CrossFit. You're not getting, you might have a 20-minute workout that's chest to bar and thrusters and, double unders, and doing 40 minutes of zone 2 on the bike isn't necessarily going to improve that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, so let's get into some main points. So I thought about starting with these, but I decided to put these after we've hit on all the other pieces. So first thing, we need to do a needs analysis of a sport to figure out what we actually need to do from a training perspective. So what is a needs analysis? Needs analysis would be, what is the sport we're training for? What does an athlete need to compete in the sport? And then what are, let's say, the characteristics that are required to hit those needs? Give an easy example. A triathlete, the needs analysis are, they need to be able to swim, they need to be able to bike, they need to be able to run. And they need to be able to do it in that order with a relatively high intensity given whatever distance they're going to do it at. So as a result, their training is going to need all of those elements. That's like a primary aspect of the training and a primary usage of their time on a weekly basis for years. If we looked at a spectrum, on the far right is all of those implements, like very sport specific. And then we go to the left and we're looking at resistance training, functional training, however we want to classify it. That would be more supplementary to the actual needs of the sport, which are the three disciplines. So most of the time should be on the implements to develop the capacity, the endurance, the skill acquisition of those things. And then supplementing that would be the resistance training. In comparison, in CrossFit, what do you need? You need to be able to be very efficient with the snatch and clean and jerk. You need to be very efficient with gymnastics. You need to be very efficient with cyclical capacity. You need to be great with muscle endurance. You need to be great at handling stress and chaos. You need to be great at handling intensity and recovering from it. So now there's lots of things. So again, you create that spectrum. Over here on the right, you have weightlifting, gymnastics, muscle endurance, intensity, endurance in general, however you want to classify everything. And then way over here, you would have things that supplement the actual sport. And so zone 2 would be over here. Zone 2 is a supplementary tool. It's not a primary tool. So that's really important, because if somebody can't do a strict handstand push-up, like can't do a single strict handstand push-up, zone 2 would not be helpful for them. Yes, you could make an argument out of left field that like it would be helpful, but in all reality, they just need to get stronger. They need to spend that extra hour a week doing good strength training that actually gets their triceps, their shoulder girdles stronger to where they can actually do a strict handstand push-up. So that wouldn't be a good use of time with zone 2, because we need to create a hierarchy of what's most important to least important. And 9 times out of 10, zone 2 is least important. The one caveat, or the 1 out of 10 exposures, more like 1 out of 1,000, is Matt Frazier, where Matt Frazier would actually get benefit from zone 2 because he has everything else. And so zone 2 is going to allow him to recover faster. It's going to allow him to accumulate more volume. It's going to allow him to be more efficient with his metabolism. So that is very effective and helpful for him, given that he has
had
everything
the strength
that you
background.
need. Yes, he has everything you need. So you go through that hierarchy of most important to least important. He has literally everything you need. And so what would be a good addition? Something like that way over here. So that would be same with like the best triathlete in the world. He has everything he needs with the actual sport. So what would be a good inclusion? Some resistance training to make his joints more durable, to make his postural endurance a little bit stronger and more resilient, to just make his body a little bit more bulletproof for all of the tonnage that he has to do out on the road, the swimming, and the running. So, and then of course the flip example of that would be if somebody is very poor at triathlon or has very little experience, they just need to spend a lot of time doing the 3 disciplines, not very fast. They just need to accumulate the volume. So same with the CrossFitter, you need to spend time practicing, developing the skills. You need to be able to do the skills. If you can't do the skills, you probably start practicing. You need to accumulate volume. Once you accumulate volume, you need to add a little bit more challenge. Once you add some challenge, you can add a little bit of intensity, a little bit of fatigue, et cetera, et cetera. So that's hopefully a better way of looking at the needs of the sport. Where does zone 2 sit in relation to that? And making sure that it doesn't supersede those true priorities, which are all of the aspects of the sport of CrossFit. And zone 2 is, of course, not one of those.
Yeah. And 2 things about Fraser. There, one, looking to the champ or looking to someone in, let's say, the top 5 of the CrossFit Games and mimicking their training often isn't the best route for anyone else that's not there. Unless you were just maybe on the cusp of that, because this person could be so good that they're responding to training better than, or just a little bit more than everyone else. And 2, you don't understand what they've already done to get there. Like you said, he did weightlifting for, a decade, did CrossFit almost now for a decade, and then was introducing the zone 2 training. On top of that, he could be this rare genetic freak that responds very well to certain kinds of training, and you'd have no idea. So just, the same way, the best runner in the world, the way he's training, you should, you as someone who's just trying to improve their 5K that runs, somewhat competitively, won't respond to the same way that person will. So it's not the best just to look at the champ. You can learn a lot from champions in your sport, but that doesn't mean that you should just be copying and pasting what they're doing.
Yeah.
We got a little comment up here. Matt's hard work pays off programming has zone 2 in their bonus work section after the Metcons. So they're doing, I'm not sure if he's defending or if he's or he or she is saying like that's a lot of work after as well, or what.
Well, I'm curious how they label it, because do they just say zone 2, or are they pretty specific with you should be at this heart rate, like it should be this easy? Because I've seen that on the interwebs with a lot of CrossFitters who are doing zone 2. 9 out of 10 people, they go way too fast. And that's the problem, because the CrossFitter's mentality of effort and exertion is that it needs to be hard and it needs to be challenging to get a dose, when it's the exact, okay, good. So at least they give you parameters that like it needs to be easy. That's good. Because in the endurance world, it's very clear, like this needs to be very, very easy, because their conception of sport is very, very long, which implies less intensity, obviously. So I think they include it mainly because it's popular. Yeah, I would agree too, because I think people see it and they think that's a cool addition. It's like, I'm doing extra work. So
and it's a good marketing ploy because Matt said it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
and I don't know if Zone 2 after the Metcon is a great idea either. I just did a full session, or I just even did some hard Metcon training. Now I'm going to go jump into some Zone 2 training.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the person. For Matt, maybe it would be fine in his heyday, but I understand where you're coming from with it. Like I have some clients who are like fringe semifinal athletes, and some of them don't have as many roads up top. And so we've implemented 2-3 times a week where they do like 40 to 60 minutes of what we are classifying, and through dialogue, like this is Zone 2 and we're tracking it, and they do it in a separate session away from the main session. So,
what I'm reading here is meaning like part A, this, part B, hard Metcon, part C, Zone 2.
Yeah. I think it's better if they're separated, but I'm not sure what research says on that, but I think might be better. I think it might be better, just off the top of my head, thinking out loud, if you just did some Metcons or some tough training and you have higher lactate levels present, and then you go do Zone 2, your body might be predisposed to leveraging lactate as a fuel source, which goes against what you're trying to do with Zone 2 training in general. So you might not be in the right physiological state to get the adaptations you want then. I could be wrong, but that's just thinking out loud. That might be an argument for why you might not want to do it post-training. Again, I could be wrong, but that's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah. Because even if your thought process is, now that I have a lot of lactate, I'm going to go do the zone training to try and teach my body, even if I have a lot of lactate flowing present, then I would use fat instead. But that might not actually happen at all either. So like, we don't know if that would happen.
Yeah.
Got another comment here. Should a 50-year-old overweight guy who wants to do the open, has decent skills, handstand push-up, muscle up, etc., snatches 275, really good at everything strength? I've been thinking Zone 2, I gas out everything. A lot of points here.
Well,
a lot to look at.
Yeah, I mean, because gassing out is going to be very specific to like, what are you gassing out at? Is it a particular movement? Is it a particular position? To give an example, I posted earlier this week, I was at Legends with some athletes of mine, and the last 2 events, the first one was like 6-minute AMRAP of ascending dumbbell snatches and goblet squats. And then it was a 1-minute rest. And then it was for time, 50 dumbbell thrusters, 25 bar facing burpees with a 3-minute cap. So it's very squatting, knee flexion heavy. And of course, masters athlete, there's a huge discrepancy in movement efficiency, because some spent a lot of their teenage 20s, 30s doing like functional movement or lifting. So they move really well. Whereas others just got into CrossFit when they were like 40. And maybe they did a lot of running or some other endurance sports or something. So they're very tight. They don't move well. Their squat's really poor. One of my clients, she struggles in this position. But she's doing her best. She's getting better. I say that because Sherry's probably listening, and so I want to. I want her to know I'm thinking about her. She's doing great, and we're working on it. The point being, watching all of them perform that event, the people who had really good positions in the squat were able to express more work in that pattern, because the onset of fatigue was a lot slower, because the cost of every rep was very low, because the body wasn't straining so hard to get into that position. So when somebody says I'm gassing out, that could just be because you can't get your arm all the way overhead without extending through your lumbar, or you can't even lock out your arm. So
Mm-hmm.
if you can't reach full shoulder flexion, then when you go upside down, you're not going to be able to breathe very well, and you're also not going to be able to load your scapula very well, and so the rate of fatigue is just going to go through the roof. So
Yeah.
could zone 2 work help? Maybe, but maybe you just need to improve your mobility in that position, and then all of a sudden you're able to access more capacity that you didn't know you otherwise had. Same with the squat too. If your front rack position is really poor, then anytime you do a front squat or a thruster or a wall ball or even a goblet squat, it's going to be really hard to breathe because you're so flexed and closed off. Like you can't breathe
Mm-hmm.
very well. So you don't want to miss what's possibly really limiting you, which is maybe it's a positional thing. And I think a lot of people don't think about that when they think about limitations. They think about like, why can't I do more reps? It's like, well, if you can't even get into the right position, you're not going to be able to do quite a bit of volume there anyways. So try to work on improving the position as best you can, because some people are just going to be limited. There's only so much they can do given their anatomy and where they sit. So you're going to try to get as much out of that as you can. And then you try to start building capacity on top of that. So
Mm-hmm.
without seeing how this guy moves, which if you snatch 275, I mean, you got to
That's what I
have
was going to get
some
into.
pretty good movement, accuracy, efficiency, speed, strength. So the gassing out could be a pacing thing. It could be the type of training you're doing. I think the takeaway could be maybe you need to do more easy work to learn how to pace and learn how to breathe. So that might
Mm-hmm.
be the way I would think about it. But what do you
Yeah.
think?
LDY. If we're referring to you and you're the jack dude in the photo, and this is for you, first my initial advice would be hire a coach. But my second, and just kind of broad strokes, you're 50 years old and you say overweight, maybe aim to lose a little bit of weight. Maybe we could start there. Has decent skills, improve your skills. Like Tim said, the more efficient you can be, the better positions you can get in, the easier work will become. So if that is mobility, or if maybe you have great mobility, you can snatch 275. So either you're literally a freak and you have terrible mobility, or you have pretty decent mobility for 50, because 275 is a really good snatch, and for 50 it's awesome. So
That's really good. That's like
yeah,
best in the world.
yeah. So send me a message on Instagram. So improve your skills. That will really help. If your things don't do, it's not a bad thought. It could really help if you have the time. But if that's taking up too much time from you, and if you're not going to be able to improve your skills, then probably taking up too much time. There's ways you could probably blend it to maybe do some what you would think is zone 2 easy work while doing some handstand push-ups and maybe an LSD style training that we use, and then you gas out with everything. So yeah, we don't really know what that means, but if you're truly gassing out with everything, then you probably need to just adjust training to look less like a 275 match and more like some metabolic work. Those are broad strokes, but if you want to improve, you probably have a lot of room to improve. If you're snatching 275 at 50 in like a good way, you probably can improve a lot at some other things. If you're thinking you're mediocre at everything, but you have a 275 snatch. He just said, it's body weight, LOL, but it's mostly breathing. And yeah, I'm trying to lose weight. Yeah. So just lose a little bit, keep working on it. Hit us up if you need some help. The larger you are, the harder the body weight's going to get. So yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents on it. We got another one in here from Mac. Zone 2, massively important. It's literally where 90% of the biochemistry performance is built, no matter the level of athlete. Interesting take.
Yeah, that's a good comment. The only thing that came to mind in response to that would be back to let's think about CrossFit. If somebody can't do a strict handstand push-up, then that's not the zone 2 wouldn't be the lowest hanging fruit. The lowest hanging fruit would be they're just not strong enough. Doesn't mean they're not going to get easy work and easy volume accumulation in their training week, but it ought not to be a priority above the strength that they don't have. So we need to think about what are the lowest hanging fruits for the people in front of us, given the sport and the demands of the sport. Because I don't disagree. I understand where you're coming from. It's very, very important because you are trying to build the roads, the physiology to support work capacity. However, we have to be cautious in not making that more of a priority than things that are going to move the needle a lot more than just great capacity. Because you can have great capacity, but if you're not strong or you can't perform any of the skills, then you're not going to be able to compete in CrossFit because there are barriers to entry with the sport. So that would be my only response to that. But it is a good observation and point.
Yeah. And maybe maybe like zone 2, massively important. Maybe just, like you could
Volume
just kind of
accumulation.
you could replace that with endurance, volume, easy aerobic work. Aerobic work would be a good way to say it. So yeah. And LDY said the snatch is his body weight. So he weighs 275. Yeah. You could drop 20 pounds on your snatch and still be probably in top 5 of 50 of snatching in CrossFit. So I wouldn't worry too much about increasing your snatch.
Yeah, I would just I'd lose
even if you
lose 50 pounds. Get down to 225. Yes. Everything would be easier.
Easier said than done.
I know.
But yes. Yeah. So where were we on this? How much this time spent? Were you on? You mentioned part 7 or 8 on your main points.
I mentioned 7, and then 8 is reference to what I just mentioned there, which is time spent on easy aerobic work should be weighed against its impact on overall performance in the sport. So that's where, is it more beneficial for them to get stronger, or is it more beneficial for them to spend time accumulating easy aerobic volume? And so that's where we need to look at this athlete, where they're at, what are their goals, how much time do they have available? Because you need a lot of time to drive the adaptations you want. Doesn't mean if you only do 10 minutes, it wasn't impactful. It adds up over time. But if you're only doing 10 minutes a week, it's not really going to move the needle very much. You need hours. Peter Attia's book, he recommends 3 hours per week, which is a lot. But maybe it's something you aim to build towards. Now, again, context is important because it's not a lot in the endurance world. In the endurance world, that's like a day. So, context is very, very important in all of this. But for most people who are going to probably listen to this, you need to do an assessment of where you're at, where you're relative to your goals, what are your biggest needs, and then let that help you figure out where you need to spend your time in training. And for most people, it's not going to be adding hours of zone 2 work. Most people need, whether it's improved movement efficiency or improved volume with good mechanics or improved strength if they're not strong enough, and improved volume tolerance. So building volume each month, just gaining more and more volume. So.
Yeah. And I think one of the last things I wanted to hit on was like the intensity or event mismatch I had noted. So like, especially now leading into the season, you're in quarterfinals, we are not going to see a 30 to 40 minute workout of rowing or like a predominantly endurance style event. So
no,
this style
not
of training,
at the games. I don't even do it at the games.
So in general in the sport, other than like a 5K or one long endurance event, especially if you're considering every event, 30 events you're doing from the open to the games, it's not matching. It's not, directly correlating versus like if you're doing a triathlon, like you might be running for 30 minutes. So, it doesn't mimic the sport.
Or 3 hours.
It's not like practice. Whereas when you're practicing for your sport, it needs to look like that. So especially as you get closer to, the open, other and say you still want to improve those areas, like, because most people think I need to improve rowing, I need to do zone 2. If you need to improve rowing and you're leading into the open, quarterfinals, semifinals, there's other approaches that probably suit you better.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you can be creative too with how you design training, where you're adding volume of easy work in the presence of more sports specific work, which, for example, get on the rower, ride it for 2 minutes at an easy pace. You could figure out what the zone 2 pace is if you wanted to use that, or just an easy pace in general. You can go back to the talk test idea. You get off at 2 minutes, you do 5 burpees, 5 kettlebell swings, 5 toes to bar. You get back on the rower, you row until the 4th minute mark, you get off, you do it again, and you do that for 8 rounds. So you get 40 reps of each of those movements, and you've accumulated about 25, 30 minutes of easy rowing. That's a really simple way of building volume, not only for sports specific movements, but also easy aerobic volume, and also learning how to actively recover. So that's, of course, challenging, but a nice way of managing the amount of intensive work you're getting in the week, while also getting a lot of good, easier volume that can help support your overall training levels or ability. I'm trying to think of how I want to say it. Performance, training performance. That would be the way to say it. So that's a nice, simple tool that I use a lot with a lot of people, especially in the off season, to build volume. And you could classify that as, I wouldn't even call it zone 2 work, because you're dispersing periods of unsustainable work in there. So I don't think of it as zone 2 work, but I think of it just easy work that helps build the overall performance capability of the athlete.
Yeah, that also leads me into wanting to know to people doing, say you have a 30-minute, 45-minute AMRAP or 45-minute, you would, in this case, they would call zone 2, and it's, 20 cal row, 20 box jumps, 20 push-ups, single unders, just a mix of easy work. That is not zone 2 training. Just because you slapped a heart rate intensity on it and said, I'm doing XYZ. I mean, say you just slap a heart rate zone on it and then go perform X work, doesn't mean it's zone 2 training. So a lot of people are getting wrapped up thinking like, I'm doing wall balls and rowing and easy running, and it's all easy, and that's my zone 2 work. Whereas that might be valuable to you, that isn't zone 2 training. I don't know if you've seen people, or you've seen people
kind of. Yeah, I've seen stuff like that.
This was even before, like, this is where I more saw it in a lot of comp train style training, and when Henshaw was getting big, but it wasn't when Henshaw was getting really big, but before the zone 2 kind of blew up from Fraser, there was people saying, I'm doing mixed work and that's my zone 2 training, and then everything they did on a machine was aerobic training. So they were like, I'm doing 10 cal sprints, that's my aerobic capacity training. And then it was, I'm doing 30 minutes of mixed work, there's my zone 2 training. So I think people have a misconception from the start of what zone training is in general, why it can't be performed doing mixed work.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's a total mismatch of knowing what you're actually even doing.
Yeah.
Or they just don't even know. Yeah.
Buzzword training.
Yeah, buzzword training.
Yeah, so that's a wrap. If anyone has any more comments, you guys can spill them in. But as a whole, zone 2 training can be effective. It could be effective for CrossFit. You just have to understand what you are trying to gain out of it, and how much time you have, and what is best plan moving forward. And it sounds like a lot, and it is. So that's where possibly getting a coach or working with one of us might help you, because you wouldn't have to think about that, and you would have a subject matter expert making those decisions for you, or helping you design that roadmap for yourself.
Yeah. Got to know the sport. What are the demands of the sport? What is it testing for? And what do you need to excel at that? And then how does this tool, just one tool, how does it help or not help the pursuit of that? Because to give an outside example, as we wrap this up, weightlifters don't do zone 2 work. Bulgarians never did zone 2 work because they don't need it. The sport didn't demand that, nor does a hammer thrower or a shot putter. So we got to come back to like, what are the needs of the actual sport to dictate what do we need to be doing and developing to use our time wisely, because we only have so much time. So the usage of zone 2 does have applicability in this sport because of the grayness of power and endurance that CrossFit is. But we can't put it on a pedestal and say like, this is the separator between me being at this level and then me being this level up here. And for those listening, I had my hand really low and then I had my hand really high. So got to always come back to the person, goal, where they're currently at in relation to the goal, what things are limiting them, and start working on those pieces, the lowest hanging fruit, and then kind of work your way up from there.
Yeah. Yeah. Lowest hanging fruit. That's that's where you should start. That's the advice. But yeah, so if you hopefully you learned a little bit about zone training, have a better idea of it. We still encourage you go look it up, go understand it, because then you could probably make you will be able to make a more educated decision how you can implement it. And there are a lot of people that have written or talked about some really good stuff within the parameters of CrossFit about zone 2. You could probably learn a lot of that. If you still feel like you don't know what you're talking about or didn't learn much, then it's possible it's just not resonating with you and maybe you don't even need it. So the sport, like Sam said, what the sport is going to dictate what you need for training. So you just have to figure out what you need, and it sounds easy, but then you have to go from there. So yeah, no more questions coming in.
I think that's a wrap.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining. You can also, if you're listening and it's not live, you can also add some comments, and we'll try and get back to you the best we can. I'm usually on there surfing the comments on past shows. So if you have anything, I'll try and respond. If you want to talk with one of us, or maybe work with one of us, or learn more about what we're doing, you can just check the description. Plenty of links there. And you can always reach out to us on email or Instagram, and the links are there as well. So we appreciate everyone joining, and we hope you have a great day.